Section 2 in the bill analysis amends Subchapter A, Chapter 171 of the Health and Safety Code by adding 171.0031 as follows. Section 171.0031 is titled Requirements of Physician Offense. This is what I was talking about a moment ago. The offenses that physicians will be subject to if they are found to have violated provisions of this particular area of the bill. Subsection A requires a physician performing or inducing an abortion to, number one, on the date the abortion is performed, have active admitting privileges at a hospital that is located not further than 30 miles from the location at which the abortion is performed or induced, and provides obstetrical or gynecological health care services. So let's break that down. On the date that the abortion is performed, this has to be in place. The doctor must have active admitting privileges at a hospital, and that means the doctor needs to, on an active basis, be participating in providing care, medical care, at that hospital. A question was asked a moment ago, well, why wouldn't a doctor go ahead and just get admitting privileges and then continue to be able to provide these services? Well, I have two responses to that. Number one, because this requires that the doctor have active admitting privileges. And if a doctor doesn't practice medicine in a hospital facility, like Dr. Campbell does in the ER, then a doctor isn't going to have these active admitting privileges. And to require that they be active, not just that there be an admitting privilege, but to require that they be active, as this bill does, serves the very purpose that many of us are concerned that it serves. It serves the purpose that doctors, far fewer doctors, would be provided with the capacity under the law to provide what today they're providing in legal, safe, clinical settings to women. And actually, it would be very interesting to know, and I don't know if anyone's done this analysis yet, how many fewer doctors would there be who would satisfy the provisions of this ordinance and therefore be able to practice medicine in abortion clinics were this particular provision to go in place? And would hospitals somehow then feel pressured to create admitting privileges, active admitting privileges, and how would they handle that? Of course, we got a letter from THA that spoke directly to that, and they said, you know, we reserve the right to grant admitting privileges to doctors who practice in areas that we need them to be practicing in our hospital. Most of them don't have the need for doctors who perform abortion services as active, admitting privileges doctors for their hospital. And I think the bill authors understand that at the end of the day, what this is going to do is create fewer and fewer options for women to exercise their constitutional right. Now, the fact that it has to be located not further than 30 miles from the abortion facility, again, I don't know if anyone's done the analysis on this yet, but I'd be really curious to know how many of the existing abortion facilities are within 30 miles from a hospital where a doctor could be licensed. In fact, I'd be interested to know of the ambulatory surgical centers, would that actually disqualify any of them, even under this bill? If a doctor who practiced in that ambulatory surgical center didn't have a hospital even within 30 miles to which he or she could gain active admitting privileges, what's that going to do in terms of the number of facilities that would qualify here? And what I found was really interesting about that too, and we talked about this in debate on the bill, was there are so many ambulatory surgical centers. I've got a list of them here. I may read that in a minute. There's a long list of them, but only 5 or maybe 6 actually perform abortion services at them. And what we wondered out loud when we debated this bill on the floor was, you know, if what we really care about is that abortions take place in ambulatory surgical centers, why don't we require ambulatory surgical centers to provide that service? Here we're requiring that hospitals do something. We're requiring that if they have an interest in making sure that abortion services can continue to exist in an area in which they reside, that they will have to admit these physicians as active admitted physicians. We're actually imposing a legislative requirement on hospitals to do that. But we're not imposing any kind of requirement on ambulatory surgical centers to allow these procedures. And if what we really cared about was women's safety and well-being, why wouldn't we think about doing that? There are many surgical centers, ambulatory surgical centers that fit this bill. The other requirement of the physician in an offense, if the physician does not meet it, is that the physician must provide the pregnant woman with a telephone number by which the pregnant woman may reach the physician or other health care personnel employed by the physician or by the facility at which the abortion was performed with access to the woman's relevant medical records 24 hours a day to request assistance for any complications that arise from the performance of the abortion or ask health-related questions regarding the abortion. Now, I talked about that requirement a moment ago, and I think that most people would agree that if a woman has had an abortion and there may be complications that arise. I used the example a while ago when I had my wisdom teeth out. My dentist made sure that I had his number, that I could call him in the next 24 hours, even if it was 12 o'clock at night, if I had some excess bleeding. He also gave me the phone number of someone who worked in his dental office if I couldn't reach him. And I don't think any of us would disagree that a woman who's had an abortion should be provided with information in the event that something happens after she leaves the facility. Of course, it's the practice of the facilities right now for women to wait for a certain period of time for them to determine that she is okay and ready to be released. But certainly I think we could all agree if this were the provision of the bill, if this were it, if we were truly talking about women's health care, if we were truly talking about making sure women were safe after an abortion, this is the kind of thing that goes right to the heart of that and that we could agree should happen. The other thing that the woman must be provided with, according to the bill analysis, is the name and the telephone number of the nearest hospital to the home of the pregnant woman. Now, let's think about that for a minute. It's not the nearest hospital to the abortion facility. It's not the hospital within 30 miles of the abortion facility. It's that the woman be given the telephone number of the nearest hospital to her home. And remember, members, when we debated this bill and we talked about that woman from Laredo who's returned home, if she has a complication that arises and she's driven the 200 miles to San Antonio to one of the only ambulatory surgical centers that provides abortion services in the state of Texas, and she gets all the way back to Laredo, she's not going to go to a hospital that's 30 miles from the abortion facility. She's going to go to a hospital near her home. And it's another indicator of why it makes absolutely no sense for the doctor who performed her abortion to have admitting privileges at a hospital that's 30 miles away from the facility, when even the bill itself says the abortion facility is not supposed to give the woman the name and the address of the hospital that's 30 miles away from the facility. He's supposed to give her the name and the telephone number of the nearest hospital to her home. Under subsection B, it provides that a physician who violates subsection A commits an offense, and provides that under this section, it's a Class A misdemeanor. Punishable only by a fine, but it's a Class A misdemeanor. It's a crime, members, for a doctor to fail to have privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of an abortion facility, and a failure for the doctor to provide the information that's required and that I think we all agree should be required. Section 3 amends Chapter 171 of the Health and Safety Code by adding subchapters C and D as follows. Subchapter C, abortion prohibited at or after 20 weeks post-fertilization. Section 171.041, short title, authorizes that this subchapter be cited as the Preborn Pain Act. Wants to make sure that that title is provided to this particular provision of the law, the Preborn Pain Act. Again, because that's argued as the compelling state interest for which this 20-week pain provision is being required, or being prohibited, the 20-week abortion. In the definitions, it defines pre-fertilization age and severe fetal abnormality in the chapter. So let's talk about the fertilization age issue. Section 171.043 requires a determination of post-fertilization age, and it prohibits a physician, except as otherwise provided by Section 171.046, from performing or inducing or attempting to perform or induce an abortion without first making a determination of the probable post-fertilization age of the unborn child. Now let's think about that for a minute. We're going to hold doctors to a very difficult standard here. We're going to ask doctors to make a determination of the probable post-fertilization age of the fetus. Now, members, we've all gotten a lot of information from the medical community on this particular issue. And what they tell us is this isn't the standard that's used. It's never been the standard that's used because it's an impossible standard to meet, because it's asking doctors to do something that they are incapable of doing. Unless a woman becomes impregnated by in vitro fertilization, well, then they can tell you the probable post-fertilization age of a fetus. But doctors use a different standard for determining gestational age, and they do it for a reason. They do it because it's the most reliable, and they do it because they have absolutely no idea exactly when fertilization occurs. Because for every woman, her ovulation period is different. Some women actually ovulate during their menstrual cycle and get pregnant when they think they can't get pregnant during their menstrual cycle because they're ovulating during that period of time. And there is a reason that fertilization is not the standard that's used because members, doctors, have a better understanding of how to judge gestational age than a bunch of senators from the state of Texas do. But we're going to tell them, by golly, that they can't even